Hi, and welcome back to COVID Calls, the show that's discussing COVID-19 and all the business and economic fallout behind it, as well as some of maybe the more positive or thought-provoking elements of this virus. Today, we have a number of interesting guests on the show. I'll just bring them on screen one by one so we can say hi. So we have Roberta Metsola. Thanks for being with us. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thanks for inviting me.
Luke Frendo, legal advisor. Luke, can you hear me?
Yes, thanks, Chris. I can hear you.
And Xuereb, the president of the Chamber of Commerce. So we'll be discussing. And can you hear me, by the way?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, we're good then. Thanks for watching, guys. Whoever's logging on today, feel free to send us your comments as well. We'll be seeing them live, so we'll be able to respond to some of the questions you may have as well. Today, we're going to be discussing a number of interesting points. First of all, we'll be discussing some of the measures the EU is taking to help and what else the EU could be doing. We'll also be discussing some of the business measures done by the government and hearing from the Chamber of Commerce, David from the Chamber of Commerce, to see how they're even negotiating these deals within the context of this sort of increasing lockdown in the country. And we'll also be speaking about the impact of international trade and businesses that deal with international clients as well. Yesterday on the show, we had MEP Miriam Daly. We had a very thought-provoking conversation over there as well. And like I said, send your comments and your feedback to us. We'll start with you, Roberta. So just a couple of, first of all, how are you handling this whole crisis? How is the reality of being locked at home and still having to work?
Well, it's a new situation for me, having to spend so much time with, first of all, the children at home. I have never appreciated the work of teachers so much that I spend most of the morning catching up with all the lessons. I have all 4 children are being sent stuff from school, so that's quite challenging. But also, the work in the European Parliament is ongoing. We yesterday had the votes on the approval of the initial financial package that is going to be given to member states, and we have to continue insisting that not only does that package grow, but that the European Union actually coordinates better with better cooperation among member states. Hopefully we can also talk about that and how Malta and its leadership comes into it.
I'll ask you about that in a second, but I just wanted to start with your analysis of the Maltese government's measures so far, both from a health perspective and a business perspective. Are you satisfied? I know that today you posted a Facebook post saying that some of the measures are beneficial. Many businesses are still being left out, and you made a little dig as well at the Prime Minister for partisan comments that he made. Can you elaborate a bit more?
Well, I think now's the time for real leadership across partisan lines, across political leanings across the country. And my appeal would be for the Prime Minister to be the first one to do that. I think his comments about the opposition were ill-advised. I think it was also embarrassing to whoever, all the stakeholders that were sitting behind him at that point were, at a time when everybody's looking for, as I said, leadership, both from a health perspective, but also from an economic perspective. I think from a health perspective, I think Professor Sharmin Gauchi is doing very well. I think the daily informative sessions are excellent. Everybody looks forward to watching her and getting the update on how the system is coping. Of course,
are we coping? Do you think that from a healthcare perspective? I mean, yesterday we heard that there are only 100 ventilators, for example. Is that something that worries you? Is Europe helping at all on that front?
Absolutely. On this, if anything, I would say that Europe very much is helping. If Malta had to be outside the European Union, competing with the largest countries in the world for example, ventilators, then of course we'd always be in a situation where Spain, that requires 10,000 ventilators and is tendering or is applying for a national tender, will have an advantage to Malta. But because we're in the European Union. What is being used is a system that has been put in place. It was not put in place just for this. It has been in place for years, that allows for the whole of the European Union to create a tendering process, and Malta can put its bid as part of the 27 member states of the European Union. And that means that Malta will, irrespective of its size, will be able to participate and get what it needs. And in fact, in this case, I think the government has been at the forefront of making sure that we get our supplies. And as an opposition, we've also been and extended our hand of cooperation, just like we did yesterday with the vote in the European Parliament, on ensuring that Air Malta does not lose on its slots, on ensuring that the initial cash injection is made available. So in this case, I think that we are doing well. Would have been doing better if our public hospitals were not sold off, but let's keep it at that. From an economic point of view, first of all, I look forward to hearing what David has to say about this, but I also would like to insist on further measures, as the opposition is doing and as the private sector is doing, for those that have not yet been covered.
What are the areas? Sorry, what are the areas you think that have been left out most?
Well, I think the self-employed and the companies that employ a small number of persons are still asking for help to be given, particularly for them. The measures that were announced yesterday were not done clearly enough. I think it would have been better if, once you are going to impose quarantine rules, you have to make sure that all the questions that are going to be put, and in fact, I thank you and your colleagues also and the media for putting those questions before people completely panic. I think that the queues we saw today outside the supermarkets was in fact a reaction to the uncertainty. But we have, yes, sectors, and we will be also as an opposition putting forward the calls for these sectors, for example, the publishing sectors, the printing sectors, all those sectors that are not yet covered by these measures from a cultural perspective, etc., that needs to be covered, because these are sectors that, without the help of government, without a big cash injection today, not tomorrow, not next week, they will see a mass unemployment also from these areas.
I'll be asking some questions to David later about how some businesses are affected, how some others, even about this issue of NACE codes and whether that's an appropriate way of categorizing businesses. But just one other point with you, Roberta, from an EU perspective, do you think that EU leaders are properly united on this? Do you think that they're just looking after their own, or do you think that there is appropriate action and like from an ideological perspective, are we aligned that everyone is on the same track, or are there very different, or are there divergences in terms of how we should approach this crisis?
Look, there is a risk that the populists take over, right? That you have misinformation also used by political leaders, internal EU borders being reintroduced, citing public health and security concerns, and then never being reopened, with problems that will be faced also by Malta, because we are dependent on importation, on making sure that goods and services flow freely. But we have seen over the past few days incredible examples of leaders of the EU helping others. We've seen the donation of masks by Germany to Italy, by patients being transferred from France across the border into Germany for treatment. And I think that we will be seeing more of that. But we need to, and this is where also the media comes in, and this is why I've been so vocal on the defense of the media, because media houses are also in danger at this time from an economic point of view, because so much misinformation is flooding our news feed. So many fake news items are coming up on our social media feed that it's very easy to believe something that the authorities are not saying, or for dangerous, and I will call them with responsibility, dangerous political party leaders in some member states that are saying certain things only with regards to spread fear, only with regards to put up once again xenophobic or intolerant barriers. And that is something that we have a responsibility to make sure in member states, and this is part of what the European People's Party is going to do, which is the party I form part of in the European Parliament, is to call on all leaders to get together in combating all this.
I'm going to move on to David like in a second, but I just want to know, Rob, what is it like to negotiate deals today within this reality? So you're voting remotely. I know that David is also dealing with that from a chamber perspective. We'll be speaking about that, but on a practical level, is it? Are we adapting? Or are people? Is there still an element of, well, if there ever was, an element of efficiency in the way the EU works now that it's all online?
Well, I wish we didn't have to go back to printing voting papers and submitting them electronically like we did yesterday, but there had to be found a solution which meant that 702 people did not get together in a chamber from all corners of Europe with the high risk of infection that there is currently, and we managed. It took a while, but we've had, for example, video conference meetings with 200 members in one meeting. We've seen how technology has adapted even from when this crisis started to today, at allowing free interfaces, okay, with the data questions that we are faced with and privacy in that regard. But we have managed to communicate virtually, and that is something that, in fact, when I met with Mark Zuckerberg a few weeks ago, that is also something we discussed there and then. And I didn't think at the time that we would be already now putting those practices or even ideas as they were then into reality.
I think that Facebook is also struggling with the amount of bandwidth and
they need to do much more.
Being used at the moment. David, President of the Chamber of Commerce, I know that you've been working extremely hard to lobby for business interests to save jobs ultimately. And let's start with that point. How are you actually doing it from a logistical perspective?
Logistics, okay. So logistically, we have moved very much from a forum where we have, as you know, at the Chamber of Commerce in Valletta, we have a grand building with a number of of meeting rooms and large halls and all that. We used to have hundreds of people flocking into our building every day and every hour. This has pretty much dwindled. Most of us are working remotely. Even for those working at the Chamber, we're actually interacting with our members probably more than ever before in the light of what we're going through right now. But
I think that's the reality that many people are experiencing, right? Like that, even though they're stuck at home, they're communicating with people more than ever before. But so your meetings with the Prime Minister and the Economy Minister, how are those? Are those happening in real life?
Until now, those have been in person. So the number of times I've met ministers and the Prime Minister, they have always been in person till today. So
I wonder if Boris Johnson's testing positive is going to change that anytime soon.
Yes, exactly. I mean, certainly messaging and calls and all that are ongoing. I mean, receiving messages and calls pretty much all the time. We are very, very connected. To your initial sort of question about the Chamber of Commerce lobbying for business, actually, we're not doing that. We are not really lobbying for business. What we are doing, consequentially, is actually lobbying for employment, to retain employment within business. So any euro that we negotiated, as low as that may be, or as non-overarching and comprising as that may be, have been steps trying to assure that in the process of us moving further deeper into the world of COVID here in Malta, we are able to preserve the relationships that exist between employers and employees as far as possible within the relationship of an employment, rather than in outside of that is in unemployment in the covers of Jobs Plus.
But so we've had a number of measures. I believe 2 or 3 rounds of measures have already been announced. We had the economy minister on this show earlier this week who promised that there will be that this is not the last of the measures. You know, which are the sectors do you think that have been left out so far? I know that you have effectively endorsed the measures that the government has proposed so far, but surely you're also inundated by calls of sectors who are saying this doesn't apply to me. I need this as well. You know, who's being left out?
Absolutely. So the first definition of the entities that have been covered by the first measures are those directly affected by the instructions given by the Superintendent of Public Health.
The ones that have been closed.
Closed, literally closed, because of a direction given by the superintendent herself and the Ministry for Health on account of health priorities, which I think we all have to appreciate and endorse and promote.
But obviously, even businesses that are not closed are facing severe,
Yes, of course. So first of all, those that have been closed need not necessarily have been on a wage bill of 800 euros a day anyway. So there are issues there with businesses that are generating zero revenue, are pretty much taking monies out of their coffers, against all or most voices turned around in the last couple of days. Businesses do not have profits put into a savings account somewhere just in case there's a rainy day one day and people will write checks to cover those costs. The reality is most of the profits in the past have been reinvested in the business itself, and that's how the economy of the country grew. So yes, 800 euros for those that have been covered by the directions given by the Superintendent of Public Health have been there, largely appreciated by 40,000 odd employees and their employers.
But even on that point, there are some questions, right? Because they're using these NACE codes to determine which companies are meant to benefit from different measures. But obviously, these NACE codes were never really used in this context before. Many businesses were registered without even knowing on other codes that don't apply, and they might be obsolete now in terms of how they were registered. So are you facing these queries from people who were shut down but don't feature in these NACE codes?
So all the time, to answer to your question. However, we are in contact with Malta Enterprise, who is administrating, actually putting together a website that will have a VAT number and the NACE code associated with that, and therefore the measures that one was able to benefit from the latest announcements by government. Clearly, these are not watertight. There are lots of doubts on that. As we go along, we are highlighting the uncertainties that those NACE codes will generate. One, on account of not being registered right in the first place, and number two, NACE codes themselves don't necessarily reflect the real business type of our organization. So we're going through a process from last Tuesday night, literally, till, as far as I know, next Monday morning. This is where the Malta Enterprise is going through this. We are helping Malta Enterprise to sort this out, and hopefully we'll have what would be a NACE code punch-in entry that will allow businesses to really reassure themselves on availability and opportunity.
So your advice to businesses at the moment who are worried that they need these measures but they don't apply, these measures don't apply to them, what's your advice to them? To wait and see?
Yes, of course there are about keeping away the people working in the coffers of government. There are about another 110,000 other employees and respective employers who are, of course, were left out or covered by what we're calling Annex B. That is, the covering of 1 day a week or 2 days a week, depending on whether you're remote or in GODS or self-employed or not. As announced about 2 weeks ago. Those are mostly covered by that. But then again, that is probably not enough. Also on account of the fact that most of these businesses now, and every day that passes is actually getting worse, not better, and we expect this to get even worse moving forward. Let's be realistic. Of course, we are taking on all the feedback we're getting from these organizations. What we have done today, we organized at the chamber through the digital media, organized a meeting with 35, I think, representatives of various business sectors who are like-minded and who are objective, of course, in their opinions on the real situation on the ground at the moment, feeding into the chamber on the realities of the needs and the expectations and the troubles and maybe the opportunities in some instances of the various sectors of business. This is being compiled in a document as we speak now by the Chamber of Commerce. This was the task we set ourselves last Tuesday, so this was the meeting we had today. And now we expect to put together the same 25 economic experts in Malta, so the top brains in economy in our country who are working in business themselves. So they are very much in touch with the realities. They were the ones who supported the Chamber of Commerce to be able to provide the tangible feedback to government last Tuesday. They will be reassembled again, probably over the weekend, And I have already invited the Prime Minister and his leads to join that meeting so that we are able to take on whatever we heard today as input. We'll be able to churn it out into realistic and tangible and valuable
So the advice to get in touch to
hopefully will be
Chamber.
economic output that would be able to provide government with the right sort of recommendation or advice, if you like, on next steps in support of our economy. Again, this is not the economy that we need to, again, I erred here. It is really not the economy that we're trying to preserve here. It is the employment, the attachment, the engagement of employees with their current employers.
But just a quick question: what should businesses do? Get in touch with you? Get in touch with Malta Enterprise? Like if they're now and they need to, regularize their position.
So the port of call should certainly be Malta Enterprise. They have a website called covid.maltaenterprise.com, which is really the website that contains most of the information, and they have a number that one can call. It's a free phone, and they are able to get as much information as possible. However, I appreciate that is not enough. So the Chamber of Commerce has become pretty much a customer service center for most of our members and businesses in general, not necessarily our members. I, for one, am inundated with messages in all forms of media, phone calls, and meetings with everybody under the sun to be able to provide one reassurance on whatever it is that we can reassure on, but also tangible direction, information, advice on where they can get information or what to expect, or rather us taking on their suggestions and their pains and aches and anticipations, if you like, to be able to again make sure that we are as representative and as truthful and as honest and as objective as possible when it is we're speaking to the authorities.
And I'm going to get to Luke Frendo in a second to discuss this at more length, but I want just a sense from you in terms of the ideological approach to this crisis, in terms of helping as much as possible immediately or helping at a later stage or staggering it. Are there many differences in the way government and business groups are approaching this problem? Like if you were to highlight the major differences that you're seeing, what are they?
Certainly, there was a major difference between government's first recommendation to the support of economy. We were all out against that, to what was announced by the Prime Minister last Tuesday. That was a great first step. That was just the first step. As you rightly said, Minister Silvio Xuereb said this is one step we'll be able to tweak and improve and reinforce. Certainly, there seems to be as well a conversation happening on how aggressive we need to be in how we're going to address our finances, and therefore how much we're going to be taking loans out and put ourselves in debt upfront enough to be able to preserve these businesses. And what we're doing right now is we're measuring the effectiveness of what has been communicated on Tuesday, not only through just the spreading out onto the rest of the business sectors, but also to ensure that what was being presumed as a solution to safeguard employment is actually working. If it is, that's great. If it's not, we have to correct. And if there's maybe one encouragement that we as a business community and most of our, of our allies or supporters are telling us to do, and this is what we're doing to government, saying to government, is, do not be afraid. We've had many surpluses. Our economy was in top shape when this all started compared to other countries. Let's be bullish and let's get get the monies, loan ourselves out, and get all the monies that we can to whatever it takes really to ensure that employment is preserved. There are many more steps after that, of course. Getting the monies to preserve what we have today is just the one step. There's a lot of other steps that will happen over the next couple of months, including leveling out, being sensitive, and
we'll discuss these at more length as well. I just want to bring in Luke as well. Luke, you're a legal advisor. You've got your own company in Malta, but you've also your client base is mostly international, right? I want to get a sense. Obviously, David is working on the ground to kind of get the government to react appropriately. But I want to get a sense from you about how much business is being affected, not just in Malta, but also internationally, and how long this is likely to take as well. And whether you think the measures being announced both in Malta and at a new level are anywhere near enough to get us through this without, massive disasters.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that struck me about this crisis, and it's just one anecdotal example, is how fast it's come about without any warning whatsoever. And I think a number of people, even prominent people, at very senior supranational institutional level, have initially, and by initially I mean a few days ago and a few weeks ago, underestimated the severity and the impact that this has had and will have on global economies. Like somebody who, Christine Lagarde, for instance, is one of the people who seemed to have underestimated in the beginning. She's the head of the ECB and someone who has an absolutely stellar reputation, but she came out and wasn't in the early days, so a few days ago, and wasn't as direct about the extent that the ECB was going to be able to intervene as her predecessor Mario Draghi was in 2011, for instance, who said that the ECB will do whatever is necessary to uphold the Eurozone economies. She has completely changed her tone very quickly. And I think that's somewhat like illustrative of the nature of this crisis, right? So
could it be that we don't know yet how bad it is? So could it be that we're still underestimating the way she underestimated it 3-4 days ago? Do you think that we, even those people who are saying, this is really, really serious, but could we still be underestimating the economic impact? What are you seeing on the ground? What are you feeling from your clients as well?
I think that's absolutely possible. That's why I'm sympathetic towards the government having not necessarily made the right decision first time round. I mean, if someone like Christine Lagarde, who has decades of experience and currently heads up the ECB, got it wrong, then I think a lot of us are justified in having not got it entirely right first time round. I think what's important is that everybody, businesses and government, and everybody who's impacted by this, stay as much as possible ahead of the curve. Do not underestimate the implications of what this might transpire to be, and takes immediate action on the one side. Like, I think what we need to do today, and what businesses I'm sure are doing and definitely need to do, is to batten down the hatches. Like, so today, and ideally yesterday, we need to be battening down the hatches. We need to be protecting our downside risk. We need to, like, for us as a business, for instance, whilst new business flow has all but come to a standstill, we have focused the last 10 or so days on improving operational efficiency, reducing costs, like eliminating fat where it may have existed in the past. And I've seen this happen during the 2008 and 2011 crisis, when I was working at Deutsche Bank, and it's continued to happen over the last 10 years in the banking sector, where obviously that industry has been hit very hard on an income, on the top line level. And what they did at the time, and what they've continued to do since, is almost turn their operational departments into like pseudo income departments. So if you're not generating any income, then you need to see how you're going to remove the fat. And I think this applies equally to government. So government should be looking at itself internally, should be seeing what inefficiencies there are, and remove that fat. Right?
On that note, Luke, I just want to, even with Roberta on the line, I want to ask maybe a bit of a controversial question. When we think back, retroactively now, with this crisis in mind, at initiatives that the Maltese government has done, such as the passport scheme, the citizenship by investment scheme, which was so highly criticized when it was introduced, but today, possibly allows us some breathing room in terms of the country's finances to deal with a crisis like this. I know that your company is also involved in in this scheme, so I want to know your perspective about whether this changes anything in terms of whether this was a good idea or not.
Look, firstly, I acknowledge the sensitivities around it. I acknowledge why people feel particularly sensitive about it and might oppose it. Some of those reasons I think are justified, others perhaps less so. But I think it's very difficult to argue against an economic instrument today, which we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years has injected into the government coffers directly. So this is not This is not revenue generated, a percentage of which is collected in taxes, over €1 billion. And that's not including any of the multiplier effects. If you look at that and to put that into a little bit of perspective, that's the equivalent of about €365 billion being injected into the German economy. And that's actually a conservative figure. There are, in my opinion, very few economic measures that any country can enact that will generate that kind of liquidity with some certainty and such a short period of time.
So if I can just, Roberta, can I bring you in on that? Obviously, you've been a very vocal critic of the scheme. Does this crisis change anything over there for you?
Well, I think besides the principled stance that I have, that I will retain, that I don't think, I think it was unnecessary for Malta and its reputation to go through such a very difficult time over the past years, precisely because of the schemes, maybe not necessarily the operators, but the people who thought it up, the people who are going to take kickbacks from it, the negative spotlight we had with Pilatus Bank, the Prime Minister and his Chief of Staff, etc. I think that was unnecessary. I think other systems and schemes that we had took a hit because of that. I think our online gaming, such an important sector, also took a hit on the side because of the negative reputation that our country had for the past.
This is €1 billion, almost as much.
I'm also going to ask a question, and perhaps I think looking back, now is the time to discuss it. I mean, did the fact that we were just looking at the money coming in make us lazy as a country in terms of identifying other niches that we could have built over the past years in terms of our digital infrastructure, in fact, in terms of our making our island much more digitally ready than it is today, in making our island much more possible in attracting different kinds of investment, different types of companies? Could it be that we stopped looking at that because we were just looking at cash no matter what? Now we have to ask those questions: where the cash has gone, how much of it, why is there still such lack of transparency? Why are the questions that have been asked both on a national level but also on a European and international level, are they still unanswered? Will it affect us in terms of regaining our credibility? I mean, let's not forget when we talk about the previous crises, Malta faced them with courage, faced them with a strong economic backbone, faced them with proper diversification of its economy. And I think we need to really start to think about what our strong foundations for an economic vision we can have. And this is what it's my responsibility to discuss this, to propose it, and to come up with different models of making sure that our country can withstand crisis in order to have the injections that we need, in order to have the assurances that whoever today has a restaurant will be assured that he can open up when this crisis is over, that he can continue to employ the people he's employing, that he can actually employ new people. These are all issues that we have to ask. Frankly, I think the responses from the Minister for the Economy could have been better over the past few weeks. I look forward to their improvement, but we are going to definitely continue asking those questions.
Luke, what do you make of that? That question or series of questions, did it make us lazy?
I actually agree with most of what Roberta has just said. I think there's one criticism I've always leveled with respect to the IIP program, is that the funds have never really been used, and they haven't specifically been designated to create long-term sustainable industry. I think there's been a lot of funds generated, which it can't be anything but positive, but the government has probably failed at putting that money to the best use possible. And I think the best use that can be put to, or one of the uses, is something that Roberta also alluded to. It's to create a tech or startup industry. Now we'll see, even coming out of this, like, a lot of the most successful startups in the world have come about as a result either of crisis or of trying to address problems. We have definitely a crisis which has brought to the surface several problems, and I think as a result you'll have a lot of entrepreneurs looking for solutions to those problems. I think
Which kind of begs the question, Luke, like by giving all businesses or several businesses, cash injections at the moment, like could we be propping up businesses that their time is up? Could we be should we be putting that money into businesses that would thrive in this new kind of world? But I also want to kind of we don't have that much time left, so I want to ask a couple of other questions. First of all, global leadership. Do you fear, Roberta, Luke, David? Do you fear that we're going to be countries are going to be looking at their own interests over global cooperation? And isn't this the time more than ever that really exposes our unpreparedness in terms of global cooperation?
Chris, can I
can I go first? I have some trouble with audio, so maybe I can start it off, and others who we can continue. Definitely is the case. I mean, solidarity, as we might have wanted to imagine it in the normal in our days, doesn't seem to be there very much. Everybody's very, very worried about his own turf, and actions are taken pretty much on the basis of that. The risks that we see, apart from the political, which I'll allow Roberta to speak about, and yourselves, is really the fact that we all really depend on, or if we're trying to imagine what it is that's going to come post-COVID, this is going to depend on a couple of factors. First of all, how we're going to be dealing with our emotions and our psyche. That's certainly going to be a very important one, because no matter what, when people are sick and people will die, this is going to send unnecessary or unwanted emotional shockwaves.
Yeah.
Number two is, how strong are we to manage our health service in these circumstances? Some countries are in competition here. So when you think about dropping the curve and not raising the curve too much, and all that we hear about, which of course is very, very useful and very important, the flatter the curve and the longer the curve actually means that the country, while safeguarding the health and the lives of people, also means that the longer the curve means that we're going to take us a long time for us to get out of this unfortunate pandemic circumstance we are in, which therefore means that the uptake in our economic life and economic relationships will take longer, which means that we will fall short of our competitive advantage that we have benefited from in the last couple of years. One thing that we need to do, and this is what certainly the Chamber of Commerce is doing now, is we need to have a few people that sit on the side, realize that there's a fog right in front of us, and start to decipher what it is that's going to appear right in front of that fog. The faster we're able to do action, different ways of doing things, and different ways of doing business, and different ways of being efficient, the faster we are able to get out of this in a competitive world. The world is doing this, all countries are doing this, and unless we are able to do the same, then we will fall short. If we're able to do this cleverly and collectively, maybe we stand a chance of regaining our turf.
I'm going to cut to Roberta soon, but Luke, you were going to say something before?
I just want to say on the point you mentioned earlier about complacency, I think that's actually a very valid point to raise. I think we there are several things I think that can be an advantage for Malta. One thing that I think puts us at a disadvantage is that we've effectively had about 3 generations of people who have had no relationship with an economic downturn, since the Second World War probably, which has created this implicit nationwide feeling of moral hazard, which is this mentality that probably the sun will never stop shining, so continue laying hay. And that concerns me, that I'm worried about, that there's probably portions of our self-employed, of industry, who have been acting over the last few years in a way which completely disregards the possibility of a downturn. Now, hopefully, as a result of having experienced one now, we will have the next generation of business leaders who are very conscious and very aware that business and the economy in general can take a dip. Hopefully, we can turn that into a positive.
From a political point of view, though, Roberta, how do we create global structures now? I mean, surely we've now realized that there needs to be, a proper, decision-making, proper cooperation globally, right? And there's the risk that we do the exact opposite. I'm sure you're seeing some EU leaders already doing the exact opposite, right? How are you experiencing that?
Yes. I think the biggest mistake the European Union could do is to break up further, in the sense that you could have national leaders that go their own way rather than show a united position in order to fight against, again, campaigns, disinformation campaigns. We're seeing Russia having a big role in that. Also, what the US president is saying, Donald Trump, and in different versions, and the shockwaves, both economically but also socially, that a president of such a large country and the world's largest economy can actually make when speaking with such irresponsibility. But if I can sort of look a little bit further on, and if we find ourselves in a few weeks, few months down the road, where we're actually starting with the structures that we've put in place or that we've strengthened to look forward on what kind of legislation you need. What I would like to see there is that we don't go down the road of a situation where we once again start to see that the economy and the environment are mutually exclusive. I think we've made big leaps over the past months and at least 1 year. We've seen an ambitious European Commission, ambitious government understanding that the environment has to go hand in hand with the diversification of the economy. What I've already seen in the past a few days, and this is what Luke said also, the way how Christine Lagarde reacted, and there was a campaign saying bring Mario Draghi back. But the idea was precisely because we were seeing certain fear that was making us go back into thinking, okay, then we were moving on the environmental agenda, now we have to go back to preserve everything. The risk we run is that we reintroduce every single border that we've managed after such a long time to take away. And that has to really mean that we get together, we work together, both from a legislative perspective, but also from a political leadership perspective, in order to move forward and give ultimately the sense of confidence to our populations that we can bounce back from such a difficult time.
So just the last question, because we've got to round it up soon. If you could find one really positive thing about this crazy negative experience, what would it be? Let's start with you, Luke.
I haven't drank alcohol in 3 weeks.
Well done. David, what's the most positive thing you're seeing?
Okay, one of the positive things, I'm a great advocate of anything to do actions against climate change and global warming. And I think maybe one of the lessons learned, we're learning as well, is that we are able to change actions and be more efficient and act differently, of course, in this case, because of health. I think we will learn a lot of tools and skills to enable us to work differently, to act differently, to respect more, and therefore contribute towards action against climate change.
I think on that point, one thing that's been really interesting is something that I'm experiencing is how efficient everyone is being all of a sudden. We're not wasting time anymore with commuting to places. Our meetings take 20 minutes instead of 2 hours. And there seems to be this great sense of hustle and efficiency that we've never seen before, and with its environmental ramifications as well, in terms of less pollution, less cars on the road, things like that. Roberta, what about you? What are you sort of most hopeful about or positive about in all of this?
I think one of the most positive things I've seen is a couple of hours ago, a person who is going through chemotherapy at the moment has to leave where she lives in order for the people who are living with her to continue to work, because otherwise they would be a danger to her and her vulnerability. And I sent out, a few requests for help for this person, and the amount of offers, of proposals that I've received in order to help this one individual, and you can multiply that by thousands of offers for help that we've seen in Malta, is really something to make us proud. And it's something that we should really, when we look back and say that when in times of big trial, we can really step up and be counted as a country, no matter our size.
Super. Thank you very, very much all for joining COVID calls. Thanks for watching. And we'll be with you again shortly. We're not sure. Maybe we'll do an episode tomorrow. We'll let you know. So thanks, Roberta. Thanks, Luke. Thanks, David. And keep up all your good work and good luck, obviously, for making the most of this situation.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you.